Have you ever thought, why don't they teach that in school? As a teacher of 23 years myself, I noticed that students had less and less of some of the basic skills they needed for everyday life. You know, things like how to write a thank you note, how to make a phone call, how to apologize, how to write a check and balance your account, how to sew on a button, how to clean the bathroom and vacuum and do laundry, how to operate a fire extinguisher, how to turn off the water to the house. And thus, Adulting 101 was born. You can go to jamesdevine.net, click on the Adulting 101 course link, and take a view of a few free lessons. And if you like what you see, sign up for the full course, and you can get 30% off as a Cool Grandpa listener. Just enter the code COOLGRANDPA at checkout.
Hi, I am proud to have partnered with Redio. As you guys may have heard from past episodes, Redio is a great application that enables grandparents and parents to maintain and grow relationships through virtual reading of books with their grandchildren. Now, Redio does not take the place of any kind of in-person interaction or in-person reading to your grandchildren. But what it does allow for is for those remote connections when you can't be there with your grandchild every evening. Redio has well over 4,000 children's titles, and there's bound to be titles in here that you and your grandchild are going to enjoy together. There's a great way that you can build a library with your grandchild, and there's fun interactive tools within Redio that allows grandchildren to point to objects that are interesting to them, as well as you using the pointer to show objects that are interesting to you and that you're trying to express to the grandchild. So what I want you guys to do is go to thecoolgrandpa.us, look for the affiliate links on the top of the website, click on that, and then go down to the Redio links. Once you click on that, then you'll be taken to Redio where you can learn more about the application, and then you can also sign up for your free 14-day trial period. I know you're going to enjoy this application to maintain and grow those relationships when you just can't be there in person. So do yourself a favor, go to thecool-grandpa.us, look for the affiliate link, and then scroll down to Redio. I'm sure you're going to enjoy it, and I'm looking forward to hearing stories about how you've used Redio to build those connections. Hello, and welcome to the Cool Grandpa Podcast. This is your host, Greg Payne, coming at you from Studio 12. This podcast is about being the best possible grandpa you can be, focusing on what it is to be a grandpa and how we can all share that experience together for our grandchildren. Hi, and welcome to this one-on-one episode of the Cool Grandpa Podcast. It's a chance for me to sit down once a month and talk about kind of what's on my mind in regards to being a grandfather. Now, this month, I've been thinking a lot about the use of labels, how we use labels with our grandkids, children, and people that we associate with. Now, one thing that's important to remember is that labels can be good and bad. The purpose of labels, or how I think humans use labels, is to quickly be able to communicate multiple concepts and multiple ideas about a particular subject, whether it's a person, place, thing, whatever your favorite noun is going to be. Now, with labels, again, these things can be positives and they can be negatives. But I think with our grandkids, sometimes they can be negative even when we're trying to think about how we're using them is a positive. Now, here's an example of what I mean by that. When we talk about our grandkids as being an athlete, being bookish, being studious, and some other adjectives, sometimes we're describing those grandkids to friends of ours, and we throw out a label, And that label is just trying to say, hey, my grandson or my granddaughter is all of this. And that label is X. So the label can be, like I said, a negative or positive, depending on the meaning. One thing that I do want to bring out is that as we talk about labels with grandkids, as grandkids will get a little bit older, they oftentimes will hear us talking about them, or they will hear us as we interact with them using those labels. I think this comes into play especially when we have distance between us, meaning we're not the grandfather that lives down the road or in the same town and we see them week after week, but maybe we're more of a long distance grandfather and we see them maybe once or twice a year, maybe once every couple of years even. And what can happen with those labels is that those labels can really almost keep that grandchild frozen in time, meaning that when we go and see the grandchild at 8 years old playing t-ball, and man, that kid amongst all the other kids hits the ball off the tee, absolutely no problem. The ball gets past the pitcher. The kid actually knows to run to first base versus third base. They're showing some abilities that maybe are slightly better than some of the other kids. We can start to think of that grandson. We're thinking of that grandson as being athletic, and man, he's showing glimmers of being a phenomenal athlete later in life. And so we have this label that we then come back, and when we're talking to our friends and they're saying, hey, tell me about your grandson, we're like, oh man, this kid's a really great athlete. He's been able to whack the ball out of the infield. He's been able to run the bases. He can even get his butt down when he's fielding a ground ball. He knows which base to try to run the ball to or which base to throw the ball to. Well, if we don't see that grandson for a little while, the next time we see him, he could be in a totally different awkward phase and could maybe even not even like playing baseball anymore. There's a little bit of a shift that has to occur. And I'm not saying that this is a hard shift for us to make, but it is a shift. When we use labels versus using maybe characteristics and talking about characteristics, and they're very close, so don't misunderstand me that we're using one and it has to lock us in. But I think if we think about using characteristics versus labels, I think we're much further ahead in the game, especially when those grandkids start to develop rapidly and they move from interest to interest pretty quickly. If we're talking about a granddaughter who's being shy and we're using that as almost a little bit of a negative in the sense of when she's around aunts and uncles and big family gatherings and she's shy, shyness can come across sometimes as being a real negative versus that granddaughter may just be more of an introvert. And even at an early age, being in a lot of excitement and being around a lot of people to her could be slightly exhausting. And we don't want to fault her for that. That may just be part of her personality and part of what makes her her. We don't want to necessarily use the label of being shy, as unintended as it could be, as a negative. Now, labels can also make kids feel bad about themselves. If we talk about, and especially when we're talking to parents about the grandkids, that when the use of labels can come in and kids are going to be hearing it, and it can be sometimes when we're talking about things where there's characteristics that we want to work on with them, where we want to do some course correcting, or we want to see them improve in certain areas. When kids overhear that and those labels being used about them, that can really impact them because, grandpas and grandmas and moms and dads, For a lot of these kids, we're not only the superheroes, but we're the ones that they look up to. And we're the ones where they feel the closest and the safest to. And if we're not being super careful about the language we're using and the use of those labels around the grandkids, it can impact their self-esteem. And that's not something that we want to do. I mean, we're definitely there to cheerlead, to mentor, to want the best for them, to help them grow and develop to be the best they can be. We also have to recognize too is that in some cases, hey, these kids do need some course correction, and they do need some input from us to help them be the best versions of themselves that they can be. But we just have to be a little bit aware of how we're using that. The other thing too about labels is that they often end up projecting what our future expectations are for the grandkids. And, I mentioned earlier in the example about that T-baller, very athletic, man, so much better than the other kids, has real promise. And again, at a certain point, that kid may not like team sports anymore. It can become a little bit difficult for us to shift gears, but it can also become a little hard for those kids to shift gears as well, because for a number of years now, Grandpa's been telling them how proud they are of them because of athletic accomplishments or because of different, and it may be winning science fairs, or it may be engineering or different types of activities where we're starting to put those labels around about you're going to be a great X, whatever that is. And it starts to lock the kids in a little bit, and it puts up some boundaries around them where it may be a little bit difficult for them to push through that. So what happens when, for example, we have a 10, 12-year-old that is super good in mathematics and has been heads down student, has been, showing all the signs of a lot of achievement in the field of mathematics or engineering or somewhere along those lines, where suddenly now, man, they hear Jimi Hendrix for the first time and they get blown away. And the next thing you know, all they want to do is dive into music. And maybe they've got a real aptitude for it and they dive into it. But it becomes tough for them to even shift gears because the family expectations and our expectations as grandfathers has been math and science and some of these things where they've shown ability at the start. So, we want to be careful about using labels because, again, it locks them into maybe projecting a future for them when they're still developing and still trying to figure out their interests and figure out what their strengths are. And then the last thing, too, is that we want to be careful that we use those labels as positive as we can when we are using those labels. And again, I want to stress, I like the idea of using characteristic traits more than labels. And here's an example of what I mean by characteristic traits. I have a great daughter-in-law. She is talking to my grandson and is complimenting him constantly on characteristic traits. Now, he's a 3-year-old at this point, so it's hard to find those compliments sometimes when he can act very stubbornly. But she does a great job of when he solves a puzzle that she's like, okay, you're being very clever. You're being this. You're being that. Being very careful to compliment and draw out the characteristics versus labeling him as you are super smart. You are this. You are that. And it's much more of a, hey, in the moment, you're exhibiting these characteristics. So take a minute and think about how that relationship might be when you're calling out and talking about the characteristics and what the grandchild is showing you and expressing in the moment versus making an umbrella statement or using that label, because so many of us are so many different things. I mean, in my lifetime, I've been a jerk. I've been a bully. I've been a lot of negative things. But at the same time, I've also been somebody that goes out of his way for his friends. And I've been somebody who bends over backwards to try to help other people at different times. And I've had moments where I've been a good athlete. And I've had moments where I've been a good student. But if somebody wants to just try to paint me with one or two labels, that doesn't leave room for all the other positives that I have in my life, as well as the negatives. Because let's face it, we're a combination of everything, right? At our best moments, I think we would hate to be labeled as just that person at our absolute best when we know that there's going to be days where we're going to be challenged and we're going to fail. And we're not going to live up to that label of being the friendliest person in the room. Remember too that, like I said, let's stress and let's think about using characteristic traits and those descriptions versus using the labels. And we're not going to be perfect on it. So don't think of this as, we've got some kind of a failure. We've got some kind of a deficiency because I'm still using labels. No, that's not what I'm trying to get at. I'm trying to get at, let's see if we can't do a little bit better by calling out the characteristics and allowing our grandchildren to be anywhere on a spectrum. So instead of just saying he's the best athlete, it's he's the best athlete today, or you are fantastic today. What an exhibition of athleticism. You hit that ball so well today. You were a great baseball player today. And then that allows them to, for the next time when they're having their Tuesday evening game and they go 0 for 4 and the kid hits the tee repeatedly and barely gets the ball out of the little circle that it has to be in order for it to be a fair ball, it allows them to be okay with not being the best, right? As we wrap up, one of the biggest things that helped me clarify this was discussions with my son over the weekend when I went to a wedding in Dallas for my nephew and talking about labels. And then the other thing too was thinking back for some reason this month about the Breakfast Club. What I want to do is leave you guys with Anthony Michael Hall's closing letter to the principal in the Breakfast Club, where he talks about, and the rest of the Breakfast Club talks about, how their principal used labels to just define the kids. And so we'll leave you with this. And hey, if you enjoyed the Breakfast Club and it's one of your favorite movies, check it out. It's a fun one to go back and revisit. It was a great movie growing up in the 80s, and I still appreciate it now. So until next time, remember to stay cool.
Dear Mr. Vernon, we accept the fact that we had to sacrifice a whole Saturday in detention for whatever it was we did wrong. But we think you're crazy to make us write an essay telling you who we think we are. And you see us as you want to see us. In the simplest terms, with the most convenient definitions. But what we found out is that each one of us is a brain,
and an athlete,
and a basket case, a princess,
and a criminal.
Does that answer your question? Sincerely yours, The Breakfast Club.
Don't you forget about me.
Thank you for listening to the Cool Grandpa Podcast. If you've enjoyed this episode, please do me a favor and share it with a friend. That's the best way you can help us to expand our community, as well as get the news out about how valuable grandpas are in the lives of those kids. If you'd like to leave me a comment or shoot me a potential topic for this podcast, please go to www.cool-grandpa.us. Look for the comments tab, fill it out, hit submit. It's as easy as that. Until next time, remember to stay cool.